Hi, this podcast is recorded on Gadigal land. Lee and I would like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of this place and also the custodians of the place where you're listening, wherever you are.
Hello, Sales here. If you love this podcast and you'd like to support us, check out details at our website, chat10looks3.com. Click on podcast, then support the pod. There are free options and also paid subscriptions starting at $2 a month. Thank you. It's 2025.
I know,
oh
wow.
my God. And normally we come in a bit later. We're recording this in quite early January.
We are, yeah.
And the reason is we usually do and start the year with Crabb's Summer of Culture and Sales' Summer of Culture,
Right.
and we share
Rather
what we've
grandly
been.
named, but it's sure to disappoint. Just give it time.
And normally we do that at the end of January, but we have been reading and watching so much stuff that we said, I think we just need to go and, blow the cobwebs off the recording equipment and get some episodes in the can.
Blow the bloody doors off. So would you think that you've had more of a watching, listening summer or more of a reading one?
Pretty good mixture, actually, for once, but possibly more watching because I've had a couple of longish flights, and so I tend to watch stuff more to kill the time on flights. What
I've
about
watched
you?
barely anything and I've read a lot.
That's fantastic.
And I reckon that's different from my last holiday. I didn't have a very long holiday this time. Went to South Australia for a week and staying with my parents where there's very little, very low broadband and also the telly, I don't know, they don't obsessively sign up to streaming things.
Right.
So it was just back to basics, which was pretty great actually.
So you did a lot of reading.
Heaps of reading.
Well, why don't we kick off with Crabb's Summer of Culture, and then
would be
episode
happy to
2
bore
can
you
be
for-
Sales Summer of Culture. Yep, I've
Okay.
been dying to hear what you've been reading and watching.
Okay, so I think I'm going to start with the thing that really just sizzled my burger over the holiday period.
Yeah.
I read a book called The Details by Ia Genberg. She's a Swedish writer and won some international prize, can't remember which one, with this book a year or two ago. And it was one of those things where, this is odd, it was recommended to me by my sister-in-law, Margot, who was just like, I'm reading this book, get onto it, stat, immediately. And she was like, I've just finished it and now I'm going to start reading it again. And I thought, it's always a good sign.
Yeah.
And weirdly enough, I sent a text message to Christy Hunter, who's one of our Platinum Chatters who is a massive reader. I said, I'm halfway through this book and I'm like, you need to read this. And she replied, I actually recommended this book to you 6 months ago.
Of course she did.
Okay then.
Okay, what's it about?
Okay, so it's kind of a super, super simple premise, the simplicity of which is annoying once you get into it, and it's so great, right? And you know that thing about a terrific book is that shadowing in your brain is your idea that why didn't I think of this? I could have written this book. The thing is, you could never have. The point of a simple premise being done to an absolutely twanging degree of excellence is usually that person is just a better writer than you are.
Yeah, it's the biggest red flag for me when I go, I should write a book like this. This is, it's so simple and straightforward and the writing's not very adorned. It's like that's a sign that you are reading something that's been written with a high degree of mastery that you have no chance of replicating.
Yeah. And in that sense, much as the sort of National Party ultimately meet the Greens, at some point, that is the very best thing or the most invasive thought about reading a very, very, very good book is sort of not that far away from the very worst thing about reading a very, very terrible book, which is maybe if I wrote a book, it would be like this.
Yeah, that's right.
Anyway, so this is a book that is in 4 parts. It is 100% a series of recollections and reflections on 4 relationships in the main character's life and people that she's loved. And she just describes the arc of the relationship with each of them. And it is...
Non-fiction? Fiction?
Fiction.
Right.
And it's... I wouldn't say it's not plotless because all sorts of things happen, but it is essentially a unilateral reflection on what happened in these relationships, how they changed her, how she behaved differently in them. And collectively, it turns out to be just such a moving and nuanced account of how affected you are by the people that you randomly meet and are close to for a bit and then never see again, or, you know, maybe, I found it incredibly moving. And,
wow. Okay, that sounds
really
awesome.
Powerful. Yeah.
I saw you post about it and I downloaded a sample. So maybe you and I are going away on holidays together tomorrow. So maybe I should read it on the plane or something.
Oh yeah. I mean, it's not a hugely long read, and there's also this massive, like, I wouldn't call it a plot twist exactly, but there's a moment in the book where you're thinking, oh, this seems a bit different, and then one stray sentence shuffles the viewfinder into place and everything becomes clear, and you're just like, oh my God. And because the writing is it's so taut and so, I don't know, pellucid is the word that is floating up. This incredible clarity that establishes itself when you get to the end of this very, very simple sentence is just like, it's
okay.
like the greatest plot twist ever. Even though
Okay.
it's not super dramatic, it's just like, Anyway.
Okay, great. All right.
Yeah, and that sentence at the same time reinforces the mastery of the writer, and also it confirms the reader in thinking, I was right to feel a bit confused because this has clarified things.
Did you ever read any of those, speaking of Swedish writers, that was his name Carl Ove Nausgaard?
Oh yeah.
Did you read any of that?
Not a word, although I know people who
just reminded me of it when you were
massive
speaking.
fans.
Like, sounds kind of a bit journally. What you're talking about,
Yeah. I actually read a book too that you were talking about. I read it in about a day, called The Liars.
Oh yeah.
Now
okay.
this is an example that goes the other way, right?
Sarah Manguso was it?
Manguso, yeah. And I mean, I only read it because you were talking about it, and
Right.
I don't know, I was bored. I had like a little shred of internet connection, so I bought it on my Kindle.
Thanks for the compliment. Look, I only read it because you recommended it and I was bored.
Well, yeah, but I mean, you weren't $1 million for it
No.
anyway.
No.
But like, and it was, so this book is an account of a woman who's really pissed off with her husband, right?
Yeah.
And so my husband is a liar, and, you know, here's 300 pages of me explaining why he's such an arsehole.
And why I'm such a saint and how hard done I am. I found it a bit hard going.
I just wanted to slap her by the end of it. That's wrong, isn't it? I don't know.
I know, but she was, her voice was very irritating. And of course, I think the problem with writing
this is fiction, I assume, or I mean, like, please don't tell me this is like an actual memoir. I wasn't interested in it enough to then do further research.
Look, me either. It had the reek of something that you maybe wrote at the end of your marriage breakdown, and that you should have just put it in a drawer and left it for 5 years and come back to it and then picked the eyes out. That's how I've kind of read it. But I could be entirely wrong, so I've not Googled it either.
I thought there were interesting themes in it. Like, I mean, it certainly spans, you know, I think she and her husband are married for about 15 years. They're both writers. She's more successful than he is. But when they met, he was sort of a bit of an impressive man about town and sort of taught her a bunch of stuff and was very impressive. And then she sort of eclipsed him a bit, and that was difficult. And then she realised that he was a bit hopeless around the house, and then also realised that he'd been cheating on his former wife when they got together, and then ultimately sort of the same thing happens. And in the middle they have a child, and she does most of the nappy changing. You hear about that quite a bit.
I've never read about it, but I'd be really interested to know about the psychology of the concept of, say, rose-coloured glasses. Like, so say, for example, with this guy, it seems like she feels a bit like, well, I was duped because I thought he was one thing and then he kind of turned out to be not as great as I thought he was. Yeah. But that's the story of like every person ever that's been in love, right? That you have a certain idealized view of somebody and then over time you see them more fully as a human. But for the rest of us who aren't in love with the person that is the object of the affection, it's like we sort of have more of a clarity on them, straight away. Which is why, of course, sometimes your friends might have a boyfriend or a love interest that you feel like, oh God, this is going to be a disaster. Can't you see he's a charlatan and a bounder? And the friend can't see it.
And then they do that thing when they break up and you go, oh, thank Christ, I've always hated that asshole.
And then they get back together.
Yeah.
But it's a definite thing, like the idea of rose-coloured glasses. And I bet you there's certain brain chemistry and things that kicks into play. So it's not like, it's not that the person was lying in the case of this novel. It's not that the husband was lying. Yeah. It's the fact that it was her judgment was, sort of shifted, the focus shifted over time.
Right. And in this novel as well, like there's a lot of very detailed accounts of, he got up and practiced his guitar or whatever self-absorbed hobby he has, and I got up and cleaned the whole house, and then and then the cat was sick, so I took the cat to the vet, and that was my job too, and that was annoying.
But every now and again she'd drop in this tiny hint of, well, when I was institutionalized in my 20s, and say like, hang, what? And so
he's dropping that in too, because there's this weird kind of,
he pulls it up as a kind of tool
there's something wrong with her. I don't know.
But then it's constantly. But then when it comes up, I'm thinking, well, hang on, she's not really going into detail in it. So is he actually living with somebody who's maybe has depressive spells or something, and then doesn't do anything, and he's maybe in the in between times he's doing everything? It was such a kind of, the problem I reckon with a marriage book written from the first person account is that there's two sides to the story, and I felt like we were just getting bombarded with one end of, I'm a saint, he's an asshole.
Yeah. And I think that can work, so for instance, Garner's third volume of diaries.
Yellow Notebook,
No, the last one, the blue one, How to End a Story.
Oh, yeah, right.
Which is, about the breakdown of her marriage. And that, like, there's such... I don't even want to mention it in the same breath as this other one because it's completely different, but like the story arc of falling in love with somebody who you view to be sort of, more accomplished than you or smarter than you or, more important than you in some ways, which I think certainly was the case with Garner and that particular husband, that then, starts to chip away a little bit and you think, well, hang on a minute,
Yeah.
And so I think that in her account of that marriage, her gaining of confidence as a writer kind of was locked into her, to the fragmentation of that relationship.
I want to read that book again, but my recollection of it was also it's very taut, and it almost reads kind of like a thriller, that sort of thing. And also Garner has always writes with a lot of self-reflection.
And a lot of self-doubt as well.
Yeah, so she doesn't present herself as like, I'm the hard done by party here. She presents herself more like, I'm a flawed human being in a flawed relationship. Whereas this book, it's not as... I mean, I read the whole thing, but it was a flabbier read than that.
Yeah, that's a good way of putting it. Also, interestingly, the bit, like the passage that Garner's left in her diaries, I think she edited it and scraped more words off it and, made it even more... the bit that actually describes the final sundering of the relationship is actually not very long, and it's not very detailed. And there's this great moment, though, on that page where she says... in other words, it wasn't all his fault or something like. Yeah, she's constantly threading this sort of doubt, and I think in heaps of her books, Garner, particularly the non-fiction, has had to deal with the absence of voices in accounts. Like if you think about Joe Chinque's Consolation, she never got to talk to Anu Singh. Yeah. In This House of Grief, she never got to speak to Farquharson, who's the whole book's about. And in The First Stone, she never got to talk to the two student complainants in the college kind of Me Too-y sort of thing. So I think she's like really practiced at forging on with writing, even when she's aware there's a giant chunk of landscape missing.
Yeah.
So somehow I feel like that's limbered her up a little bit for allowing for the possibility of other perspectives that you're not hearing.
Right, and writing around a big character who doesn't have their own voice.
Two things that this now reminds me of or steers me towards. One is that in the New Yorker, there is a gloriously long and very deeply researched read by Rachel Aziz about Alice Munro.
Oh, yeah.
And she's talked to the daughters, she's talked to everybody, and it's really fascinating. And I know that I just flagged that with you because I think you'll be right into it. I don't want to.
There was that really good long. There was one in the New York Times as well. Is that right? There's been 2 big long Alice Munro pieces, and the Seb Smees one in the Atlantic. No,
the monthly.
The monthly.
I
think there was a big one in the New York Times that I read as well.
But that was a bit earlier.
Yeah, that's
that
right.
was
a month or so ago.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, that's right.
But there's one that dropped in late December.
Yeah, in the New Yorker.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
So I think I've sent you a link to that in my helpful way.
Thank you.
But also, so I just bookmarked that. And the bits of that I found the most fascinating were the extent to which the daughters confirm that their mum was like borrowing scenes from their childhoods and their lives and threading them through her fiction, which I guess every single writer alive does, right?
Totally.
But it just makes you think about what the feeling is like when that's your mum, and then when you feel like you've been kind of really dropped in a hole by that parent as well. Like So the other thing that twigged in my brain was just how amazing it is when a really terrific writer makes a decision to describe a really dense and complicated scene, but dispatch it really quickly and just use these little flags and symbols to kind of highlight its importance without trudging through every single second of it. And that reminds me of Lauren Groff's book, Fates and Furies, which I reread.
Now what made you, because we both read that a few years ago, so what made you want to reread?
I think when I finished it the first time, I think I read books super fast and I often feel like I miss stuff.
Yeah.
And with that one, I think I was so overwhelmed by the gorgeousness of it. It's this great, vast, sprawling story. Her vocabulary is just unbelievable, and her facility with it is, it's very Moorish, it's like a big bag of corn chips. You just kind of smash through it. And so I think I just, greedily sucked it down, and then I felt like it would be worth going back to, and I kind of found myself with the time. So I reread it, and I was right to reread it because there was heaps of stuff in it that I didn't sort of remember from the first time round, and I just thought, oh my Lord. I've been screenshotting heaps of things that I've read, so I'm not rudely, I'm just reading you out a little bit. Oh God. Also been reading Augie March, which is unbelievable, and I've got some bits. Here we go. This is an account, this is the passage where, so the main character is called Lancelot, born to 2 very unusual and very, very wealthy parents in Florida. They own a spring water business that goes off, and so he's got all the money in the world. His mum was a professional mermaid, and then incredibly beautiful, and then married his dad, who was very unusual, and then the dad dies when Lancelot's 11, and he gets sort of exported off to boarding school, and it's all horrendous. So Lotto, which is what Lancelot, the main character child, is called, comes home from his idyllic day out in the Floridian Everglades, feeding alligators on frozen chickens and so on, and he comes back to his home. Lotto got off his bike when he saw his father on the old pub, apparently napping. Odd. Gawain, because everyone in this family is named after a knight of the Round Table. Gawain never slept during the day. The boy stood still. A woodpecker clattered against a magnolia. An anole darted over his father's foot. It's an arboreal lizard, by the way. Lotto dropped the bike and ran, and held Gawain's face, and said his father's name so loudly that he looked up to see his mother running, this woman who never ran, a screaming white swiftness like a diving bird.
That's good.
Yeah, it's great. So I loved rereading that book, and I'm glad that I did. And it makes me feel a bit awkward and anxious now because I think, God, there's so many other books I should reread. And
I know.
Yeah.
I know. I think that sometimes when I look at my bookshelves at home and I'm just like, oh, my God.
Right? How will I ever? How will I ever?
Nothing really gives the sense of, for me in my life, the time sands shifting through the hourglass like all the unread books.
Oh, right. Well,
and
I
all
mean,
the ones I want to reread.
But does that make you feel excited or terrified?
I just know I'm going to die before I can read everything I want to read.
Yeah, well,
so,
you know, once you've kind of come to terms with your own advancing mortality, you just keep, you know.
going.
So I've been reading Augie March as well,
Yeah.
which I've never read.
Who's that by?
Saul Bellow.
Oh, yeah, right.
And it's one of those things, you know, where I've been encouraged to read it so many times that I'm kind of like,
Yeah.
nah.
So what made you decide? Did you think, okay, I'm going to pick up a classic, or what was the?
Oh, I promised to read it, you
Right,
know.
okay.
And so listen to this, though. I mean, if you think you're good at describing a scene, and Augie March is about a young boy who's born into sort of fatherless circumstances and leads this life of ne'er-do-well, semi-thuggery, chuffing around Chicago, right? And he does all these weird jobs. And essentially, it's just heartbreakingly good description of characters in this meandering life, right? Okay. Fucking long sentences as well. Quiet, quiet, quiet afternoon in the backroom study with an oilcloth on the library table, busts on the wall, invisible cars snoring and trembling toward the park. The sun shining into the yard outside the window, barred against housebreakers, billiard balls kissing and bounding on the felt and sponge rubber. And the undertaker's back door still and stiller, cats sitting on the paths in the Lutheran gardens over the alley that were swept and garnished and scarcely ever trod by the chintied Danish deaconesses who'd come out on the cradle-ribbed and always fresh-painted porches of their home. One sentence. That's just showing off. Okay, so where do I go next? Also, I've been doing a fair bit of work-related reading because I'm making a new documentary series about our democracy, and that has caused me to undertake a completely just outlandishly broad, grabbing around, picking up sticks, reading things that are fascinating, some of which turn out to be sort of blind alleys. But one thing that I've read, or I'm actually still about 2/3 of the way through, is Claire Wright's new book, which is called Naku Daruk.
Oh, yeah.
And it's the history of the bark petitions, which is the Yolngu people appealing to Parliament to not hand over their entire homelands to the French bauxite company that set up shop there up in the Cape in the 60s.
Right.
And look, Claire Wright as a historian is just, I know I shouldn't be surprised anymore because like her first like major, giant, chunky, good for getting things off high shelves sort of volume of history, which is The Forgotten Rebels of Eureka. It's just a retelling of the Eureka Stockade, but with all the ladies put back in.
Yeah.
Her specialty is just like going back to just the most sort of tiny and probably at the time thought inconsequential primary sources to sort of rebuild the lives of people who've been overlooked in the telling of these historical stories. And in the case of this one, it's about an entire people. And it is just the most painstaking and kind of beautiful reconstruction of mission life that kind of tells the story of the Yolngu people and the way that they govern themselves and then how they adapted to living on this mission and then what happened when all of a sudden they sort of start seeing surveying pegs all over, their place. And then it kind of connects neatly into what was happening in Canberra at the time and the way that the church and the Menzies government and, all of these organisations that bustled around under the banner of, Aborigines welfare, etc., how that power actually distributed itself and the role of particular people. Half of it is only possible because of the mission superintendent's wife, Anne, who just keeps these incredible diaries, not just of everything going on the mission, but also she's learning the Yolngu language, and she kind of records the movements and sentiments in the group with the most incredible observational eye. So I don't know, it feels like a revolutionarily good piece of history of a totally under-recorded kind of period. Anyway, it's exhilarating to read. I'm just absolutely loving it. It's a big chunk of a book. And, you get that feeling when you're like, here we go, I'm picking up a history book. Okay, let me have something sensational to divert into. Not necessary. It's just so gripping. Yeah, incredible. Yeah, and I also, weirdly enough, have been reading this book by a writer that I really like called Matt Bai, who's an American sort of...
Matt Bai,
technology, politics, I don't know, all sorts. So I wrote this book, he actually wrote about 10 years ago, called All the Truth Is Out. And it's about the doomed presidential campaign of Gary Hart, which flamed out in the 1980s when he was, found to have kind of spent a night on a yacht with a young lady of comely appearance and...
the good old days when that was enough to rule you out of a presidential campaign.
Right? I mean, it's actually... The theory that Matt has about that particular episode, and he's sort of gone back, I mean, he wrote it 10 years ago, but it was already, looking back to the 80s, and he kind of ties it into all of these other developments in the media. Like, his theory is that Gary Hart being kind of hunted down over did you or did you not have sex with that woman, and it kind of culminates in this press conference where this one reporter says to him, have you ever committed adultery? And it's sort of like the first time a public figure has been asked something like that so boldly.
Right.
And Matt Bai says that that's the point at which there was this sort of tectonic shift in the way that politics was kind of covered, that character or moral character became this sort of significant element of public candidacy. And he also said it was also at the time when technology allowed outside broadcast vans to go and do stakeouts at people's houses,
Right.
And that made a huge difference as well. So he was just tying in all of these different technological...
that sounds great.
Yeah, it's really interesting. And I love that. And in the same, well, not really the same vein, but also in the name of me reading everything I can grab my hands onto about kind of the intersection of media and electoral design and political, structures and so on, because I don't really know what this show's going to be about yet. I read George Megalogenis's quarterly essay. It's called Minority Report. It's about the emergence of third parties, and George's theory has been for a long time that the two major parties in Australia have taken for granted that they are kind of, the two twin pillars, and by taking their eye off the ball, they've actually invited the arrival of third-party independence and so on.
It's going to be very interesting in the next federal election to see how that all plays out.
It is.
Because I think last time I looked at the primary vote for the major parties were each in the low 30%. So only one in three. Yeah,
we're third now.
Yeah.
We used to be much, much closer to 50, yeah.
So that's going to be very interesting to see if that trend keeps evolving.
Yeah, and like a lot of things that George writes, it's full of stuff from his giant brain, but he's organised it in a way that, like, 80% of the time when you're reading, you're kind of like, you feel like you had a glimmering of an awareness of this in the sort of corner of your eye, but what he does is just nail it down with research and just has a way of picking and expressing these sort of trends and shifts that make you go, oh, yep, okay,
Right.
that's right, yeah.
Yeah, right.
Interesting. Great book.
That was a little bit like that Ezra Klein book, Why We're Polarised.
Oh, God, I
that
still
read.
haven't got around to reading that, actually. Yeah.
Where he looks at the data and then analyses the trends for you. So you can be like, right, I had a feeling about that, but now someone's provided some actual
I love
data
it when somebody
and
else does
research.
the work.
Yeah.
It's the best.
Yeah.
So, look, I haven't watched a lot of movies, as I said. I watched the series Black Doves.
Yes, okay. Now, I'm one episode from the end of that, so no spoilers.
Okay, no.
What did you think?
The boyfriend dies. No, he's already dead. He dies in the first 10 seconds.
The boyfriend died. Oh, yeah.
Keira Knightley's
Sorry.
boyfriend,
Yeah. I thought you meant Ben.
No!
What's his name?
Ben Whishaw.
Whishaw, that's right.
So
did you like it?
I have to note that I have got such an amazingly hopeless crush on Ben Whishaw. I will watch absolutely anything that he's in. I don't care that he's gay. He's as gay as a maypole, and I just...
Do you know what?
I feel like I could make him love me. What do you think?
I think you can't.
I reckon, I don't know. What if I was just amazingly charming?
No. Funnily enough, I've always
so
thought
gay,
he
isn't
was
he?
kind of slightly funny looking, a little
It's
odd.
my favourite kind.
But this is the first time I've seen him in something and I've thought, no, you're odd sexy.
Oh my God, how did you not twig to this
I
earlier?
just didn't. I hadn't seen him in anything where I thought that he was sexy, and now I just think, how did I not spot that? He's so
Devastating.
sexy. Yeah,
devastating.
And he's just excellent in everything. I think he's fantastic in this.
Stop.
Overall, did you like it?
And he's
or
an
not?
assassin in this one as well, which
A trigger man.
ordinarily, a trigger man. Ordinarily, I don't find that sexy.
But you've changed your mind.
Although, I mean, interestingly, did you ever get round to watching that Australian series about the assassin?
No, but that has been on my watch list, and I really want to watch it.
What's it called?
Not. It's called.
It's the best thing I've ever seen on Australian television. I think
it's one of the Edgertons, Nash Edgerton.
Yeah.
It's called. Oh God! I'm just going to Google Nash Edgerton. I've not watched it, but you've told me
this is so
how
dumb.
brilliant it was.
I can't remember. It's so good,
Hang
and
on.
I can't.
You
remember
keep
what it's
talking
called.
while I look it up.
Mr. In Between.
Mr. In Between. That's it. Yep.
Scott Ryan. Written,
No,
starred in, and directed by the same guy who's just made this one series of television, and that's it. And before that was Driving Taxis in Bendigo or something. It's just like, sorry, what? I mean, prodigious talent.
Yeah,
prodigious
right.
talent. Anyway, great television.
So Black Doves reminded you a bit of that.
It didn't. It's just that Trigger Man is the main
Trigger Man,
character.
sorry, right.
But the same thing, where somebody whose day job is so unimaginably brutal and that obliges you to be merciless with other people. Merciless. To see that set against normal human insecurities and fears and disinclination to deal with hard things, there's something really moving about it.
Right.
And I think that that's the key to why Mr. In Between is so good. But it also is why I can continue to be like red hot in love with Ben Whishaw, even though he spends most of this series icing people.
But the issue for him and the character is that, as his criminal boss says to him, you've got some serious issues, buddy, because you've got blood on your hands and you're a trigger man, but you've got a soft heart. And a thing comes back to haunt him where he's sent on a hit early in the series, and there's a kid there, and he lets the kid go, and then the kid grows up.
And the kid grows up to be trouble.
Okay, I had some issues with this show. So.
So I'm so pleasurably awaiting your views because I know, the story of Black Doves, it's a bloody good series, actually. Keira Knightley I always find a bit annoying, so I was a bit like, ugh, I'm really only doing it for Ben Whishaw. But I thought she was great in this, actually.
Do you know what? I've seen too many impersonations of Keira Knightley on social media now, and I feel like she's now just doing an impersonation of Keira Knightley. So,
that's really harsh. I actually thought you're pretty good, and
this was
a good role. And she's a spy, of course. So she is, and this is not a big spoiler because you find it out in the first 10 minutes. She is married to the Home Secretary, Defence Secretary. She's a happily married, picture perfect bride of a British politician. They've got 2 lovely children. it's Christmas time. They're putting on a lovely party for people who have voted for them or donated for them, whatever. She's gorgeous. They're gorgeous. They're all gorgeous. But she's been having an affair with this civil servant who's found dead. Like, he gets shot in the first 2 seconds of the series. And then you also pretty rapidly find out that she is also a spy.
Yep.
She is a spy for hire. She's not even like a Russian spy or whatever. She is a dirty, I will sell anything for the right
to
money.
the highest bidder, basically.
So she doesn't even have like crim ethos.
So when it comes to when we record our next episode, Sales, the Summer of Culture, instead of splitting my lists into books, TV and movies like I normally do, I've split it under a different system.
Oh, and I'm quivering with excitement. You've done a surprising new list twist.
Black Doves.
What about how you were like, you had some mates over on New Year's Eve.
I went to someone's house.
And you were like, I went to a party because I'm cooler than you. And you were like, so I think I'm just going to ask everybody, like, what were you making a list? And you were like,
I was just saying,
why don't you drop the party and come with me? Because we're going to be making lists of our favourite, and I'm like,
no, we weren't.
Thank you.
No. We were just, I was just saying, should we talk about the funniest thing that happened to you this year or whatever? But we didn't actually. We just ended up yabbering away with the television on in the background. It was great. So I had Black Doves is under a heading, which some other things are in as well. Things that set me off to an unnecessarily ridiculous degree because of plausibility issues. Black Doves is under that. So my first issue.
I love that. So no problem with the Americans. Plausibility
no,
wise,
because they make you believe in them. They make you believe in them. Okay, so my problem, there was two things with Black Doves. I'm enjoying Black Doves. It's like
I'm guessing that you've got Spycraft issues.
I've got Spycraft issues, exactly. It's a 6 out of 10. But my first issue is...
Mark down for Spy. Oh, my God.
When Keira Knightley's spy for hire, ruthless mercenaries boss shows up to say, listen...
And she is an amazing actor as well.
She's awesome, Sarah Lancashire.
Yeah.
I loved that show. She was in The Police Procedural, whatever it was called.
That's incredible.
Fantastic. Happy Valley.
Happy Valley.
She was brilliant.
Jeez, that's good.
She's awesome.
Yeah.
So...
What about her Spycraft?
She shows up and she goes, listen, we are on to you. We know you've been cheating on your husband and your lover's dead. Have you told him anything about what you've done? And Keira Knightley was like... She fully reacts like, he's dead. And, she starts falling apart. And I'm like, love, elite spies don't fucking react like that. Like, imagine Melatru. He just would have been stony-faced and not reacted at all. Like, no. So that I had an issue with that. Then the other issue I had was...
It's very cold.
Again, pretty early on, there's a scene where
you'd prefer that this not be interesting television. Is that what you're saying?
It would be interesting if she was more believable as an elite spy. So then Ben Whishaw... There's a scene kind of pretty early-ish on where he's living with his boyfriend who doesn't know he's a trigger man, and then some assassins arrive to try to take Ben Whishaw out, and the boyfriend's like, I thought you're an accountant, what the hell's going on?
He said he was in sales. In insurance, which he technically is.
And he's deeply, the boyfriend's just horrified and traumatised, and the house gets shot up, and it's just horrendous. And as you might imagine, he's also been lied to. He doesn't know who he's living with. Anyway, then down the track...
there's also this incredibly moving scene where, like, there's all these baddies and gangsters on the way with just an unfeasible amount of guns.
Yeah.
And Ben Whishaw, wearing only underpants, gets his frightened lover down the fire escape, and he's, like, guarding him with his body.
Yeah.
And then, like, basically hands him off to a safe vehicle.
Yeah.
And the boyfriend is basically saying goodbye, just consigning Ben Whishaw to certain death, which would be hard. See earlier remarks. I mean, he'd be a tough bird to let go of, even if he did.
But then...
there's this incredibly tender moment where he sort of, like, they're under heavy fire, everyone's in underpants, and he just leans back and kind of, like, leans into the lover and then kisses him. It's, like, the most tender kind of... Anyway.
Also, dare I say... utterly implausible moment.
What is your problem with imagination and
With
television.
being pursued by 58 baddies with rocket launchers and you just stop to have a little snuggle with your boyfriend in the stairwell. Come on. Anyway, so then Ben Whishaw disappears for 8 years.
You just dismissed about 90% of the creative arts, mate. Sometimes you make shit up.
Look, fair enough.
That's the whole point.
Fair enough. That's why I said set me off. That's why the heading of this topic list is set me off to an unnecessarily ridiculous degree.
Okay.
The other thing
you recognise that this is...
Yeah, that I shouldn't get wound up about it. It's just television, but nonetheless, I'm like, oh. The other thing is, Ben Whishaw then disappears for 8 years. He shows up back again. The boyfriend's like, I never want to see you again. That is just, you lied to me. I've got a 4-year-old daughter I've got to look after. You are a lying serial killing murderer. Piss off. And then a bit later, he texts him and he's like, I just can't stop thinking about you. And then they meet up and the boyfriend goes, so how many people have you killed? Are we talking, and then Ben Whishaw answers and he's like, okay, ballpark, more than 20, less than 50. And then the boyfriend's still like, oh, well, maybe we'll get back together. I'm like, mate, you would be changing your locks and running a mile. So I had a lot of issues with Ben Whishaw and the boyfriend the boyfriend would have been like, if you ever come near me again, I'm calling the police. So,
but so in the Americans,
yep,
where periodically each of the parents would be out all day and all night murdering, killing, and their kids are just
with the travel agency.
Yeah, the travel agency just ticking over. Did that bother you?
Oh yeah, that every now and again I'd go, oh man, that travel agency. It's just
Also, how does that lady's hair stay so nice?
How did they fit
and because when are you straightening that?
No, look, absolutely. How they fit everything.
Because we know that chick has got curly hair.
Absolutely. How they fit everything into their day between her hair straightening, fitness, the weapons training.
Does not check out.
Doing all the spying and organising people's holidays and taking calls from people on holiday when the holidays, the car didn't arrive to pick them up.
I'm
getting the
I'm
kids
just
off to school.
astride a Soviet operative right now.
Yeah, that was, that had problems, but nonetheless.
What else is on it? Oh, no, I'm going to go to
you
your
wait
list.
For my episode.
Yeah, okay,
all right. You finish your list and then we'll do another episode.
So anyway, I loved it. I really enjoyed it.
Okay,
and
great.
Ben?
Call her.
Baby.
Ben Whishaw, if you're listening
Come on.
you think that, Annabelle Crabb, what was the form of words? I could make him love me. Give us a call. On 1-800, I can make you love me.
They just made me sound pathetic. Okay. I watched, let's be honest, about 2/3 of It Ends With Us because I was on a plane, but not on a long enough plane ride that allowed me to watch the end of the film. I found the film annoying. So and I essentially only watched it because I've read so much about the incredible PR warfare
that's the only thing that would
between
get me
Blake
to watch
Lively and Justin Baldoni. Now, I had heard of Blake Lively because, of course, her other job is Mrs. Ryan Reynolds. So I feel like you've got skin in this game.
You know what? I'm fascinated by this.
I can't get enough of it. Just because of the flash it gives you of the cogs of the Hollywood PR industry. And I think it is now a rolling, self-supporting ball of conflict in itself where you've got...
just to give a recap for people that might not know this. So the film, It Ends With Us, the two leads, Justin Baldoni and Blake Lively, have had a gigantic falling out.
Baldoni's also the director, I think, yeah?
Yep.
I've never heard of him before, sorry.
Should I have? So around the time the film came out, there was a lot of negative publicity about Blake Lively.
The film is about domestic violence, about it
was a best-selling book, I think.
Right,
yeah.
And she grew up in a domestically violent household, and then the
character does.
Yeah,
right.
Blake Lively's character.
Right.
And then she just loves flowers. She meets up and falls in love with this boy when she's about 15, and they get separated, but they've sort of never quite forgotten about each other. But then she meets and falls in love with this handsome neurosurgeon who turns out to have some slightly controlling,
right, and that's
grading
Justin Baldoni,
into very controlling issues. Yep.
Right.
And she eventually finds herself in a comparable situation to that in which her mother found herself, which is a baby and a violent, controlling husband.
So in the wake of the movie, so when the movies come out, there's been a lot of negative publicity and a lot of hate of Blake Lively on social media. There's an old interview surface where she's kind of rude to this woman interviewing her, and just lots of kind of snark has started up about.
And there
Blake
was a bit of
Lively.
you talk about all this light sort of airy-fairy stuff in your publicity interviews. You just made a film about domestic violence,
there was a lot of blowback on her. And then kind of out of the blue, she has launched legal action against him, claiming that he has run an orchestrated PR campaign to undermine her. Now, it's kind of interesting because, and then it's already we've seen leaking of, text messages and things where his PR people are basically saying, we're going to bury her, blah, blah, blah.
Unbelievable piece of carelessness. Like, I'm sorry, this is bad Spycraft, I think.
Bad Spycraft.
I mean, it's terrible
to put
Spycraft.
something like that in writing.
Because, the most stunning thing is that they left that this PR crowd, literally kind of, encouraging certain coverage and angles, social media, escalating social media campaigns that say that she's a bitch and that she's,
So she's now said, they've attempted to systemically trash her reputation. But the thing that I find really fascinating is once you take legal action, as we see in American courts and in Australian courts, you really are opening a big Pandora's box.
The discovery process.
The discovery process. And so I think, my God, Ryan Reynolds and Blake Lively are much, much bigger stars than Justin Baldoni. Although a friend of mine the other day, we were talking about this, and she was like, well, he actually has quite a bit of power because he's was running the film basically. But anyway, I would think in the greater scheme of things, the people with more skin in the game here is Ryan Reynolds and Blake Lively. And
she eventually recut the film, right? And her cut is the one that was used.
Yeah.
Oh,
okay.
And he's the director, so he's like...
Right. So I just think, wow, if I were them... No one really knows... Justin Baldoni's not a well-known person. If he's talking about people in his private text messages, we're not really going to care. But if Ryan Reynolds' text messages with Blake Lively come out and they're talking about Hugh Jackman's marriage breakup or George Clooney, that's going to be very salacious. So I was thinking, interesting. They must feel very confident that their own lives are utterly squeaky clean.
I just think that this has been such a huge change in our, approach to defamation or litigation of any kind, right? 20 years ago, the discovery process, if you sued someone for defamation or whatever, is you'd have to cough up all the paperwork and, discovery is basically you send lawyers in to get every bit of material related or tangentially related to the case. But now, because there's such a vapor trail of correspondence, you can discover text messages, you can discover WhatsApp messages, you can discover emails, you can discover anything you've said on social media. It's simultaneously a huge job and also a much bigger downside risk because if you even have a look at the sort of Brittany Higgins, Bruce Lerman kind of epic, there's so many people that have been sort of sucked in via their text messages, including me. That's happened to me in a sort of 10 nights jumps away from that case. And it's like a horrifying experience to have your text messages that aren't really about anything because it's not even and misconstrued.
It's not even that your phone or whatever has to be discovered. It's that someone else's that's got some messages from you in it. So that or they've communicated to you.
Which is why it makes it so... It's why I think bad Spycraft on these, PR black ops people who are just sending texts on text. I mean,
that was surprising.
That was a real drop bear move that old Blake pulled, I reckon, to sue them. That's you wouldn't expect it because you're expecting that these wars will be carried out on a black ops level with everybody kind of playing by the rules. But if you actually undertake a public lawsuit, that's whoa, okay.
Yeah.
Just switching up the game.
Yeah, it's interesting. A mate of ours, talking of, you were saying one of the interesting things about it is the just insight into the world of PR and crisis comms, which is usually very hidden. A mate of ours yesterday, we were talking about the pictures that People magazine got, and it's of Hugh Jackman with his new girlfriend, Sutton Forrest. No, I knew I was going to say that. Sutton Foster. That's because yesterday we were calling her Sutton Forrest.
Because
Sutton
every
Foster.
time you drive through Sutton Forest and stop at the Hungry Jack's, you'd be
exactly. Sutton Foster, big Broadway star. So this these pictures that are very, very nice, and just one bit of a walk down a street. People magazine has somehow just got
by
them.
accident. Nobody wears a camel trench by accident, mate.
With heels.
Nope.
Anyway, so
and he's wearing white jeans as well.
So after a year of rumours that they are actually together, and that's part of the reason that the Jackman marriage broke up. Who would have any idea? I don't have any idea, and I don't pass any judgment over it. But this picture's come out. Anyway, a friend of ours yesterday who works in media was monitoring the social media posts that people put up of the footage of Hugh Jackman and his new girlfriend, and she said every single negative comment about him ditching his wife or whatever was met with one of two responses. One is they've been split for a year, they've been separated for a year, or his children are 23 and 19.
So they've got a team of monkeys just going, making sure that every criticism is answered by a user, which is, hi, I work for,
so that
beige
whole thing,
camel trench coat productions.
Yeah. And that whole thing, like when he was on the publicity circuit last year for, I think you and I said at the time, for Deadpool, he was saying Ryan Reynolds is basically stapled to him. Like he wasn't asked about any of his personal life in any interviews, and because they just kept it all really light.
Yeah, and they just asked him about his six pack.
Yeah, and Ryan Reynolds was just there to be hilarious and to keep things moving along. But it is kind of interesting to look at that and to see, because I've been wondering how would they handle that story.
How interesting that both of those people are now embroiled in high level PR kind of crisis maneuverings. But I think I want to know so much more about that industry and process. Yeah. Because I feel like it's something that we see manifested in this sort of roiling social media and tabloid coverage of celebrities' lives, for which there is just, a limitless appetite. And you don't even have to be famous anymore to be kind of featured in this kind of, breathless...
Well, there's an ABC sitcom coming up set in the world of crisis.
Oh, my God, I cannot wait for this.
I can't remember what it's called, though, but it's coming up this year. It looks great.
It's by the Contact Tracies, those two.
That's right,
amazingly...
Charles Firth's in it as well. Yeah. It looks great. Yeah.
I cannot wait for that.
Can't remember what it's called, but
and when you'll be the first to know when I remember.
Okay, hit me up with what else.
But quickly, one podcast that I listened to last year, which I think I might go back and listen to again, is called "Who Trolled Amber Heard," it's I think it's by the Tortoise people, and I think it's only one or two episodes, but the premise for that podcast is looking at what is behind, or what was behind, that social media pile-on that happened not even in the first time that she went to court with Johnny Depp so much, but in the second time when he sued her for defamation in the US for writing about herself as a victim of partner violence. That's me paraphrasing. I can't remember exactly how she put it. And then he sued her successfully in the end, as you recall. And the trial was televised, and people showed up and sat outside dressed as, that pirate kind of character. Like, it was wild. But what this podcast does is it has a look at, where did this sort of social media eruption come from? Who were the accounts that were driving it? And they call in this kind of such a fascinating person, kind of like a forensic social media expert type person, who's basically sat down and gone through all of the accounts, particularly on Twitter, that were sort of kicking this along. And he's like, they seem to be strange kind of non-state players,
wow,
and lots of bots. And basically the theory is that you can, as part of a kind of PR campaign, you can activate and foment and bring into being, I suppose, these interpretations and critiques of a person that you're trying to devalue and destroy.
So interesting.
And that's the theory, is that's what Amber Heard. And I mean, every time I look at the kind of back and forth coverage around Angelina Jolie and Brad Pitt, I'm like, What's going on there? Is there a little bit of that going on there? I don't know.
That seems to have kind of. I read something the other day that they've got.
They've settled. They've finally decided who gets the French winery.
I imagined it was going to.
Right, I know. You just never know what you're going to get to. So I didn't get to the end of It Ends With Us because I just didn't care enough about the movie. I'm more interested in reading about like what was happening on set than I am of watching the goddamn movie. Right. So that's not a good sign for the movie. I also watched Douglas Is Cancelled, but I know you watched that too. Maybe we'll talk about that at a different time because you are shifting. Yes. You're shifting in your chair in a way that tells me you urgently need a wee, or your little 30-minute brain has gone whoop, whoop, whoop.
Exactly. All right. Well, thank you for that insight into
Even
your
the way
summer.
you just for light life, exactly. All right, then.
That's a wrap.
What I really like is to really fuck up your wind-ups.
All right. See you next time.
Bested.
Thank you very much for listening or watching. You can find more of our content on YouTube, or if you don't like to look at our faces, and let's face it, that would be fair enough, you can listen to us on Spotify or wherever else you choose.